Howdy, folks, and welcome to Saddle and Sixskin, your channel for all things Western. If you're anything like us, you appreciate a good story about grit, determination, and maybe even a little bit of romance on the open range. Today, we're spinning a yarn about a woman named Ayra Prescott and a rancher named Xander Callahan. It's a tale of second chances in the Wyoming territory of 1884. So, grab your coffee, settle in, and let's get started. If you like what you hear, give us a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to Saddle and Sixskin. Wyoming territory in the spring of 1884, when the wind carried a sharp bite straight from the Big Horn Mountains, Ayra Prescott found herself standing on a cracked dirt road with a mere $3 in her pocket. Sweetwater Ridge wasn't exactly a boomtown, and Ayra wasn't chasing dreams or empty promises. She had come to mend fences, both literally and figuratively. A man named Xander Callahan needed someone who could work with their hands, and Ayra knew she could outwork most men when it came to physical labor. She'd seen the poster. Ranch help wanted, room and board provided, no nonsense tolerated. That suited her just fine. No nonsense, no time for anything else, just a chance to earn an honest living and rebuild a life for herself. She adjusted the strap of her canvas bag, the weight of her tools a familiar pull against her spine. Her boots scuffed the packed earth as she approached the gate of the Callahan Ranch, her eyes scanning the landscape and the ranch itself. What do you think she noticed first, besides the wind and the dust? The fencing along the front pasture was in a sorry state, splintered, leaning, with entire posts missing in places. For Ayra, it was a good sign. Work was work, after all, and she needed it. As she approached the ranch house, a tall figure stepped down from the porch, wiping his hands on a worn cloth. He had the slow, deliberate gait of a man accustomed to wide open spaces, the kind of walk you only get after years of working the land. His wide shoulders and lean, worn look spoke of a life lived outdoors, a life that had etched itself into his very bones. Do you ever get the feeling you can tell a person's whole story just by looking at them? His dark brown hair was tousled by the wind, and his sleeves were rolled up to the elbows, revealing sun-bronzed forearms that told his story better than any words could. He paused, his gaze meeting Ayra's. "You?" he asked, his voice carrying the weight of the wind and the mountains. Her grip tightened slightly on her bag. "Yes, sir. Prescott. I came about the fence work." He gave a curt nod. "Xander Callahan. You here to mend fences, then that's right." He could tell she was a hard worker just by looking at her. He looked her over once, not with judgment, but with the quiet appraisal that came from watching the land and the people who worked it. It was the kind of look that knew the difference between a tumbleweed and a thriving crop. "Most women do laundry or cooking," he observed, his eyes never leaving her face. Ayra met his gaze directly. "I can swing a hammer better than I can boil stew," she replied, a hint of defiance in her tone. That answer seemed to amuse him, pulling the corner of his mouth upward in a slight smile. He gestured towards a small building off to the side. He led her to the bunkhouse, a space that showed his expectations for her. The bunkhouse was small but clean, with a cot, a stove, and a single window facing the corral. Simple, but functional. She set down her things, her gaze sweeping over the sparse furnishings. Before the sun dropped behind the hills, casting long shadows across the landscape, she had a hammer in hand and a post hole dug. Xander watched her from a distance, arms crossed, a silent observer. He said nothing, but his presence was a constant reminder of the task ahead. The next morning, Ayra was up before dawn, her body stiff and aching from the day's labor. What do you think she made of Xander at that point? The frost still clung to the blades of grass, painting the landscape in a shimmering white coat, and her breath misted in the cold air. Xander was already out by the barn, saddling a chestnut gelding. He looked over as she passed, his expression unreadable. "Coffee's hot on the stove. I left you some." "Thank you," she said, surprised. She had not expected kindness, just the job. That day, She worked the back fence, digging new holes, resetting posts, and stretching wire under the unforgiving sun. Her palms blistered, but she did not complain. She had known worse pain. She had walked away from a marriage that left bruises under her ribs and silence in her throat. There was no going back, and she was determined to make a new life for herself. Each day fell into a rhythm, a predictable cycle of work and rest. Xander worked the cattle, rode into town for supplies, and always left her a portion of biscuits or stew. Just enough to show he noticed her, that her hard work didn't go unseen. He never pried, never asked why a woman like her showed up alone with a hammer and no past. But he started showing up by the fence line more often, lending a hand, holding the post while she hammered. Unspoken things passed in those still moments, under the big sky and the watchful gaze of the mountains. Trust, maybe, or something like it. Has anyone out there ever worked alongside someone and felt that silent connection? One evening, after a long day replacing the south boundary fence, Ayra sat on the porch steps, drinking water, her muscles aching with exhaustion. Xander joined her, wiping sweat from his brow with a bandana. "You work harder than most men I have hired," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "I do not have the luxury of being lazy," she answered, meeting his gaze directly. He looked at the horizon, the setting sun painting the sky in fiery hues. "You got family?" "No," she said, her voice flat. "No one left." He nodded slowly, then added, "I lost my wife 5 winters ago. Fever took her. I haven't let anyone live in this house since." Ayra turned her head, watching him, her expression softening. "You live out here alone?" He nodded again. "Well, not quite. I have 2 little ones. My boy is 7. My girl just turned 5. They stay with my sister in Cheyenne for now. I couldn't keep the ranch running and raise them too. Not after she passed." There was a pause, a long one, filled with the rustling of the wind through the tall grass. What do you think Ayra was feeling at that moment? Ayra's throat tightened. Not with pity, but with something else. A quiet ache, a sense of understanding. "I am sorry," she said softly. Xander gave a small, tired sigh and stared at the fence she had repaired that day, a symbol of her hard work and his own broken life. "You ever think about settling down again?" She hesitated, her eyes searching his face. "I don't think I was meant for that." He turned to her then, his eyes steady and direct. "What I really need is not just someone to patch fences. What I really need is a wife to come home to." The words hit her like a gust of wind across the dry plains, unexpected, honest, and without ceremony. She stared at him, her mind reeling. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," he said, his voice unwavering. "I know you show up every morning at dawn. I know you take pride in your work. I know you eat what I cook without insult," he added with a flicker of humor. "And I know my kids need more than a man who rides fences and burns his hands on the stove." Ayra looked out at the field stretching into dusk, the sky bleeding orange and rose against the land. Her hands were rough and calloused, her life a string of broken pieces. But something in Xander's voice, low, steady, and unembellished, called to a place inside her that had not stirred in years. "You don't even know what kind of woman I am," she said, her voice quieter now. He leaned back on his elbows and looked up at the sky, the stars beginning to prick the darkness. "Then tell me. I have time. If you are enjoying this story, press like or subscribe." She stayed seated on that porch a long while after he went inside, her mind racing. The light inside the house glowed warm through the front window, beckoning her towards a life she never thought possible. The next morning, she found a note tucked under a tin cup on the porch, his gesture to welcome her into the fold. "I'm riding into town for feed. Back by sundown. If you feel like talking, supper's on the stove." That evening, she stepped into the house for the first time. It was hard to believe that she was really there. There was stew warming beside cornbread, a table set for two, and beside the hearth, a photograph rested on a shelf, a woman with soft eyes, a little boy with a wide grin, a girl with hair tied in ribbons. Ayra picked it up, her fingers brushing the edge of the frame. That family meant everything to Xander. They were real, not just words, not just ghosts. Xander stepped through the doorway, quiet as the evening. She turned toward him, her heart pounding in her chest. "I'm not a proper woman," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "But I could be kind. I could be honest. I could work beside you." He crossed the room and stopped in front of her, his gaze searching her soul. "That's all I would ever ask." And for the first time in years, Ayra felt like she could breathe. "What do you think? Is Ayra going to make it on the ranch?" The next week brought a slow shift in the rhythm of the ranch, as if the land itself was adjusting to this new arrangement. Ayra rose with the first gray light and worked the north pasture, clearing rocks and tightening wire that had sagged after the last thaw. The land was waking up from winter's hold, and the soil softened under her boots. Birds nested in the cottonwoods by the creek, and the horses, restless from months of snow and stillness, tested the fences more often. How do you think this relationship will grow? Like or subscribe so we can share more stories. She learned the lay of the land through her muscles, through the sweat of her brow and the ache in her bones. Where the slope turned too slick to drive a wagon, where the earth gave underfoot after rain, where the wind never stopped blowing. Xander didn't ask her to step inside the main house again. But he didn't have to. A second plate began appearing at supper without comment, a silent invitation to join his life. She never asked if it was meant for her. She simply sat and ate after the day's work was done, the quiet between them a comfortable understanding that needed no words. One evening, as she washed up at the pump behind the barn, Xander came around the corner carrying a small wooden frame. "I found this while digging through the tack room," he said, his voice tinged with a hint of nostalgia. "Cal's old slate board. He used to drag it everywhere, even out to the cattle pens. Of course, most of what he wrote was upside down and backwards." Ayra dried her hands on her skirt, her gaze drawn to the faded markings on the slate. "Your boy?" He nodded, a wistful smile playing on his lips. "He's got a mind that never sits still. Always asking how things work. He liked drawing cattle brands, trying to guess which ranch they came from." She took the slate from him, her fingers brushing the worn grooves, each one a testament to a child's curiosity. "You planning on bringing them back before summer?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "That's the hope. My sister's husband has a railroad job now, keeps them moving. I'd rather have the children under one roof with me, especially now." He watched her face as he said it, not pressing, just watching, gauging her reaction. She ran her thumb along a chalk mark, still faintly visible. "What do you think of Xander's expectations?" "I'd be no good with them at first. I won't pretend otherwise. Honesty was the best policy when dealing with children." "I'm not asking for a mother," he said, his eyes meeting hers with unwavering sincerity. "I'm asking for a home." She looked up, her heart swelling with a mixture of hope and trepidation, and for a long moment, the breeze caught her hair and lifted it away from her face. "You're asking a woman you've known 3 weeks to build a life with you," she pointed out, stating the obvious. "I'm not counting days," he said, his voice firm. "I'm counting what I see. Make sure to like and subscribe so we can share even more stories for you." That night she stayed out after supper, sitting on the edge of the corral rail, looking at nothing in particular. The stars hung low and thick, a blanket of diamonds scattered across the inky sky, and the moon was just a sliver, offering only a sliver of light. She didn't notice Xander until he laid a folded quilt beside her on the rail. "In case you sit too long and the night bites," he said, his voice low and gentle. She took it without speaking, her eyes never leaving the pasture. 2 days later, she found herself in the attic of the main house, clearing dust from trunks and shelves. Xander had mentioned needing to sort through what was left behind, and she'd offered without fully thinking it through. The air was thick with years-old hay chaff and the scent of cedar, the ghosts of memories clinging to the rafters. She opened a trunk near the dormer window and found a small pair of boots, scuffed at the toes, and a child's knitted scarf, one loop unfinished. She folded them carefully and set them aside, her heart aching for the children who had once worn them. In the corner behind a stack of crates, she found a wooden cradle tipped on its side. She righted it and brushed off the cobwebs, revealing the smooth curve of its rockers, worn smooth with use. Xander came up the ladder a few minutes later, wiping his hands on an old shirt. "What do you think Xander thinks about Ayra's offering to do this? Didn't expect you to get this far already." "I was only going to move the trunks," he replied, surprised by her progress. "But the cradle caught my eye," she explained, her gaze drawn to the simple beauty of the handcrafted piece. He leaned against the low beam and looked over at it, a shadow of sadness crossing his face. "Jess made that herself. Wouldn't let me help. Said it needed to be hers." Ayra didn't ask if the children remembered their mother. She didn't ask what kind of woman Jess had been. Not because she didn't wonder, but because some questions weren't meant to be answered aloud, but some would be better not discussed. Instead, she said, "Would you want it down in the bedroom when they come back?" He nodded slowly. "Might be right." As she passed him to descend the ladder, his hand brushed her shoulder. Not by accident. Not too long, but enough to let her know he saw her. Not just the work she did, but the woman she was. That night, she left her bunkhouse window unlatched. Days passed, and the rhythm between them settled into something that no longer needed explaining, a silent language spoken through shared labor and quiet companionship. If you love these old school stories, like and subscribe. She patched the roof of the calving shed, and he brought her a mug of chicory brew before dawn. She mended a torn sleeve on his work shirt, and he pulled a chair out for her at supper. One morning, she was up early oiling tack when she spotted him leaning against the pasture gate, coat unbuttoned, watching the sun come up over the hills. "Ayra," he said, not turning. "I've been thinking." She tightened the girth on the saddle and waited, her heart pounding in her chest. "I'm heading to Cheyenne next week to fetch the kids. It's time." She nodded once, her mind racing. "You want me to keep things running while you're gone?" "No," he said, turning to face her, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and vulnerability. "I have been dreaming of you. I want you to come with me." She paused, one hand still on the saddle's horn, her breath catching in her throat. He took a step closer, closing the distance between them. "I want them to meet the woman who's going to help raise them. I want you beside me when I bring them home." The mule behind her shifted, but she didn't move, her gaze locked on his. "I don't need time to decide," she said, her voice unwavering. "But I do need to be sure you mean it." He reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers closing over hers, his touch sending a shiver down her spine. "I wouldn't ask if I didn't." She held his gaze, searching for any sign of doubt or hesitation. Finding none, she nodded slowly. "Then I'll come." Do you think she means it? Like or subscribe so we know to share more. The train station in Cheyenne stirred with noise and steam, the hiss of the engines rising sharp against the morning air. Ayra stood beside Xander on the platform, her gloved hands clasped in front of her, her eyes steady on the crowd. He'd told her his sister would be putting the children on the mid-morning train, and the whistle had just blown, signaling its imminent arrival. She'd never seen Xander uncertain before. Not when the mare spooked and threw a shoe last week. Not when the creek rose and nearly took the East Bridge. But he shifted his weight now, glancing toward the tracks like a man waiting for something more than just a train. When the coaches creaked to a halt and the doors opened, her breath caught. A boy climbed down first, lanky and sharp-eyed, his shirt wrinkled from travel. Behind him came a girl, her coat too big and tied with a strip of blue ribbon. She held a rag doll tight beneath her arm, her eyes wide and wary. Xander stepped forward, his voice low and rough with emotion. "Cal. Mabel." The boy looked up, his eyes narrowing before recognition bloomed across his face. "Pa," he called and ran full tilt into his father's arms. The girl followed slower, holding back a step until Xander crouched and opened his arms a second time. "I came for you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. She tucked her hands into her coat pockets and looked away, giving them space, respecting their reunion. But when she turned again, Cal was already watching her, his gaze curious and assessing. "Who's she?" he asked, his words direct and unfiltered. Not rude, just curious. Xander straightened, placing a hand on Cal's shoulder. "Do you think the kids will take a liking to Ayra?" "This is Ayra. She's been helping me at the ranch. She's real handy with tools." Mabel blinked and clutched the doll closer, her expression unreadable. "She ain't got a dress." "No, I don't," Ayra said calmly, meeting the little girl's gaze. "I find trousers easier when I'm hauling fence posts." Cal tilted his head, his eyes wide with admiration. "You dig post holes every day," he grinned, gap-toothed and fearless. "That's better than Aunt Rose. She just made us do spelling." They stayed the night at a boarding house near the stockyards, the sounds of the city a stark contrast to the quiet solitude of the ranch. Xander rented a second room for the children, and Ayra laid her coat over the foot of Mabel's bed when the girl shivered, offering a small gesture of comfort. In the hallway, she paused beside Xander before returning to her own room, her heart pounding in her chest. "You think they'll take to it?" she asked, her voice filled with uncertainty. He rubbed the back of his neck, his eyes searching hers. "They'll take to you?" She didn't say what she felt then, didn't reveal the depth of her hope and fear. Just nodded and closed the door behind her, leaving him standing alone in the hallway. Make sure to like and subscribe so we know you like these stories. The road back to Sweetwater Ridge took 3 days by wagon, each mile a step closer to a new life. The children rode up front with their father most of the way, but in the afternoons, Cal clambered into the back to sit beside Ayra and ask questions. His endless curiosity a welcome distraction from her own anxieties. "You ever fix a windmill?" "Yes." "You ever break a horse?" "Once." "Did you win?" "No. He threw me clear into a cactus." He howled at that, his laughter echoing across the plains, and even Mabel cracked a smile, her eyes sparkling with amusement. The first night back, the house felt fuller than the walls could hold. Xander carried their trunks in, his shoulders squared with pride, and Ayra set out plates without being asked, her movements efficient and purposeful. "This will make things a lot easier." Mabel trailed her through the kitchen, quiet but watchful, her gaze fixed on Ayra's every move. "Do you know how to sew?" the girl asked at last, tugging at a dangling thread on her sleeve, her voice barely a whisper. Ayra looked down, her heart softening at the little girl's vulnerability. "A little." "Why?" "I lost the button on my coat. Aunt Rose said I had to wait till spring to get a new one." Ayra knelt beside her and took the cuff gently, examining the torn fabric. "Let's find a match from the tin in the cupboard. I'll show you how to stitch it on," she said, her voice warm and encouraging. After supper, they sat near the hearth while Xander read aloud from a slim, worn book, his voice filling the room with warmth and comfort. Cal slouched on the floor, head against the leg of the rocking chair, his eyes drooping with exhaustion. Mabel curled beside Ayra, staring at the fire, her small hand resting lightly on Ayra's knee. The quiet was warm, the kind that settled deep in the bones, chasing away the chill of the past. "What do you think? Could you grow to love them?" Later, as Ayra tidied the kitchen, Xander lingered by the doorway, his presence a comforting weight against the doorframe. His shirt sleeves were rolled, and a streak of flour ran along one forearm from where Mabel had insisted he help mix the biscuits. His face was happy. "They took to you," he said, his voice low and filled with gratitude. She rinsed the ladle without turning, her expression unreadable. Children notice steadiness. That's all I offered. They noticed more than that, he wanted to shout. They noticed kindness, they noticed strength, they noticed a woman who wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty and work hard. She dried her hands slowly, her gaze meeting his across the small space. It's one thing to help, another to belong. He stepped forward, the floorboards creaking faint beneath his boots, closing the distance between them. You belong, Ayra. She looked up at him, her eyes clear and unwavering. I need to hear it plain. He took her hand, his calloused fingers wrapping around hers, his touch sending a jolt of electricity through her veins. This house feels right with you in it. I want you here as my wife. Not out of need, but because I've come to want you beside me. She stood still for a long moment, her heart pounding in her chest, her mind struggling to reconcile her past with the possibility of a future. Then she said, I'll stay, but not in the bunkhouse. His eyes didn't leave hers, his gaze filled with a love and longing she never thought she'd see again. No. With me. In our room. And when she walked past him, she took his hand with her, leading him towards a future filled with hope and promise, a life built on trust, respect, and the enduring power of love. We hope you are enjoying this story. If so, press like and subscribe. A thaw settled over Sweetwater Ridge by mid-April, the last of the snow receding into the gullies and leaving behind a damp scent of turned earth and pine. The children adjusted to the ranch's rhythm quicker than Ayra expected. Cal rising early to shadow his father through the pasture, eager to learn the ways of the land. Mabel trailing her in the mornings, asking questions in a hushed whisper, as if the land itself might answer, showing so much curiosity. Ayra had moved into the main house 2 weeks back, and though her hands itched for a hammer or a cinch strap most days, she'd started tending to the things that didn't need mending but mattered anyway. Morning bread, stitched hems, and the way Mabel's hair curled tighter when it dried by the stove. A different kind of work, one that asked for presence, not strength, but required every bit as much dedication and care. That afternoon, she and Xander walked the eastern fence line, checking for stretches that had sagged under the melt, the landscape stretching before them in all its rugged beauty. Cal rode ahead on the pony, circling back every few minutes with a shout or a question, his youthful energy a constant reminder of the life they were building together. Xander moved slower than usual, his gait slightly uneven. You limping? She asked, not stopping, her voice tinged with concern. Old break. Kicked by a mule back in '79. Always limp like that? Only when I'm too stubborn to rest. She glanced sideways, a hint of amusement in her eyes. You planning to rest? Not if I can help it. They reached a section where the wire had pulled free and curled from the post like a snapped violin string, a testament to the relentless forces of nature. Ayra crouched to anchor it while Xander steadied the post above, their movements practiced and efficient. What are you all thinking of joining this family? You ever think about building more shelter out here? She asked, her gaze sweeping over the vast expanse of the ranch. He nodded once, his eyes following her line of sight. Been meaning to raise a hay shed past the gully. You've got the materials mostly. Just need hands. She tested the wire's tension, then rose, brushing dirt from her knees, her expression determined. I've got hands. He looked at her, squinting against the sun, a smile playing on his lips. You offering? I'm not the type to suggest something unless I mean to see it through. That evening, she found Mabel in the barn, standing beside one of the milk goats, her brow furrowed in concentration, her small body tense with frustration. She won't stand still, Mabel said, frowning, her voice filled with exasperation. Ayra crouched beside her, offering a gentle smile. They don't like sudden movements. Try humming. Humming? Mabel looked at her skeptically. Something low, like this. Ayra began a slow tune, a simple melody that seemed to soothe the restless animal. Nothing she'd been taught. Just a rhythm that fit the quiet of the barn, a connection forged through shared sounds and gentle intentions, and Mabel followed, her voice soft and uncertain, but filled with a determination to succeed. The goat stilled, its large brown eyes fixed on Mabel's face, and Mabel's hand steadied on the pail, her small body relaxing. Afterward, as they walked back to the house, Mabel reached for her hand without looking up, her touch tentative but trusting. Ayra didn't speak, just held it warm and small in her own, a silent promise of love and support. Later, after the children had gone to bed, and the kitchen was dark but for the oil lamp over the table, Xander sat with a blank ledger open before him, his brow furrowed in concentration. Ayra poured 2 cups of water and set one beside him, offering a silent gesture of care. "I saw you favoring your side again," she said, her voice soft with concern. "I'll soak it later." "You should take tomorrow off," she insisted. He looked up, one brow raised in amusement. "And let you run the place?" "I already do," she replied, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. He smiled faint and tired, then closed the ledger, his thoughts drifting towards the future. "I've been thinking we ought to plant something behind the house. A patch for potatoes, maybe carrots." She leaned against the edge of the table, her gaze thoughtful. "Is Ayra finally happy?" "You planning to dig it yourself?" she asked, her voice teasing. "I was hoping you might." She nodded. "Fair trade if you build that hay shed." "I'll start next week," he promised, his eyes filled with a love and gratitude he couldn't express in words. She reached to gather the cups, but his hand caught hers gently, his touch warm and comforting. "You've made this house quiet in a good way," he said, his voice low and sincere. "Not empty, just steady." She didn't pull back, her gaze locked on his, her heart swelling with emotion. "I used to think I was too much of something, too blunt, too hard. Too opinionated, some would argue. But maybe I was just with the wrong kind of man." "You're not too much," he said, his voice filled with conviction. He stood then, his movements slow and deliberate, and stepped closer, closing the distance between them. "You're just right." She looked up at him, her voice low and filled with a vulnerability she rarely allowed herself to show. "Is Ayra finally home?" "You sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." She didn't answer with words, just leaned into him, forehead resting against his chest, his arms folding around her like they'd belonged there all along, a perfect fit, a love that had been waiting to be found. Outside, the wind stirred the grass, and somewhere near the barn, the pony nickered once, soft and drowsy. Inside, the warmth held. The night had settled over them. By early June, the hay shed stood finished, its roof lying clean against the western sky, a testament to their shared labor and unwavering dedication. Xander had built it with his own hands, the sweat of his brow mingling with the dust of the earth, Ayra beside him every day, steady with the mallet, measured with the planks. They worked without needing many words, the rhythm between them solid as the grain in the lumber, a silent understanding forged through shared purpose and mutual respect. Inside the house, things shifted in quieter ways. Mabel began setting her doll aside at supper without being asked, her small hand reaching for a fork instead, a sign of her growing independence. Cal started keeping a tally of the milkings in a rough notebook, his letters uneven but determined, a testament to his eagerness to learn the ways of the ranch. Ayra found herself thinking of the days and markers not of survival but of growth. The first calf born that spring was thriving, its spindly legs gaining strength with each passing day. The potato patch behind the house had sprouted early, promising a bountiful harvest in the fall. The wind no longer felt like something to brace against, but rather a gentle caress, a reminder of the beauty and resilience of the land. One warm afternoon, Ayra stood at the clothesline, pinning up a faded shirt when she felt a tug at her skirt. She loves the way they are all together, finally. Mabel held out a folded scrap of fabric, her eyes shining with pride. "I made this for your hair. Aunt Rose used to braid mine and tie it with ribbon. I thought maybe you'd like one, too." Ayra took the cloth, her fingers brushing the tiny, uneven stitches, her heart swelling with emotion. "You sewed this?" "I tried." Ayra crouched low, meeting Mabel's gaze with a warmth that radiated from her very soul. "Then I'll wear it, but only if you show me how you want it tied." Mabel brightened and reached up, her hands small but certain, her touch gentle and loving. When she finished, she stepped back and nodded once, satisfied, her eyes sparkling with pride. From the barn, Xander watched them, his arms folded, his eyes soft with something he didn't say aloud, a love and gratitude that ran deeper than any words could express. That night, as the children slept and the frogs sang low by the creek, Ayra sat on the porch steps, a cup of water in her hands, her thoughts drifting over the events of the day, her heart filled with a quiet contentment she had never known before. She felt Xander before she heard him, the boards creaking gently under his weight as he eased down beside her, his presence a comforting weight against her side. "Your hair looks different," he said, his voice low and filled with warmth. "Mabel's doing." I didn't argue. He was quiet a while, the kind of silence that didn't demand filling, a comfortable understanding that needed no words. Then he said, "I've been thinking on what to do with the west slope. The soil's soft but holds moisture. Could plant corn. Would Cal help?" Xander nodded, his eyes softening with pride. "He's got the makings of a good hand. Just needs direction." They sat with that for a while, the night warm and still, the sky a vast expanse of twinkling stars. Then Ayra said, "I've been wondering what you want the children to call me." He turned toward her, one arm resting on his knee, his gaze searching hers. "What do you want?" "I'm not trying to replace her," she said, her voice low and filled with respect. "But I'm here, and I care for them. They know that." "They do," he said without hesitation, his eyes filled with love. "I'd be all right with a LRA, or something gentler if they think it's too much. I think they'll find their name for you in time, and you'll know when it's right." He reached for her hand, and she let him take it, her fingers curling slowly around his, their touch a silent promise of love and commitment. "I never thought I'd build something like this again." "Not after Jess," he said, his voice tinged with a hint of sadness. Ayra looked at him steady, her eyes filled with compassion. "I never thought I'd be safe enough to want anything." He brought her hand to his lips, pressed a kiss against her knuckles, his touch sending a shiver down her spine. "You're more than safe. You're home." The wedding was quiet, the kind of celebration that suited their simple way of life, the quiet moments being perfect. Reverend Talbot came out from town on a Sunday morning, his coat too heavy for the heat, a testament to his dedication to his calling. Cal wore his best shirt tucked in for once, his face scrubbed clean, his eyes sparkling with excitement. Mabel carried a basket of daisies and insisted Ayra wear them in her hair, a touch of whimsy that brought a smile to her face. They stood beneath the cottonwood near the back pasture, the same one where she'd once repaired the loose gate, and spoke plain words with clear voices, their vows a testament to their shared love and commitment. No grand pronouncements, just steady ones. Promises forged in long days and silent meals, in learning how to soften without breaking, in building a life together, one fence post at a time. After, Xander lifted Mabel and Cal onto the new hay wagon, and Ayra climbed up beside them, her heart overflowing with happiness. They rode the fence line until the sun tipped low and the land turned gold, the laughter of the children echoing across the plains, a symphony of joy that filled the air. That night, Ayra sat on the edge of their bed, brushing burrs from her skirt hem, her movements slow and deliberate, her thoughts drifting over the events of the day. Xander stood behind her, his hands resting on her shoulders, his touch sending a wave of warmth through her body. "Is this the end of their story?" "You all right?" he asked, his voice low and filled with concern. She nodded, her eyes shining with tears of joy. "Feels like I stepped into something I wasn't sure I deserved. But it fits." He leaned down, kissed the side of her neck just once, his touch sending shivers down her spine. "You earned this. Every piece." She turned toward him, her heart overflowing with love, and he knelt in front of her, his hands resting on her knees, his gaze searching her.